I met the Forest Warden on a train through the Bavarian forest, on the Regen to Bodenmeis line. It was summer, and outside the forests rushed past, dark green and dense, as though the mountains themselves were breathing and the leaves pulsed with life. The train rattled over bridges, and every time we crossed water, you could feel something different, cold, damp, alive. The air became moist and green. He sat across from me and was one of those men you can see has spent more time outdoors than in. His skin was tanned by the sun, almost mahogany brown, with those deep furrows that only come from decades in the open. His hands dry as bark, with nails darkened by the forest floor, sinews standing out like roots beneath the dirt. In his eyes lay the calm attentiveness of someone who's learned not just to look, but to observe. The kind of patience you need when you must venture out daily in heat and rain, not knowing what you'll find. His whole body had a kind of sleepy wakefulness, as though the forest had given him its own rhythm, ungainly but wise. He told me of his forests, of the lynx tracks in the snow, like an alphabet only he can read. The breadth of the paw, the depth of the claw, the length of the leaps told him a whole life. Of the deer that emerged from the mist in the early morning hours, like ghosts slowly gaining flesh, their eyes large with caution. Of the old trees he called the patriarchs, still standing, though they'd weathered 100 years of wind and snow, their bark like wrinkled old skin, their crowns defiantly raised to the sky. And as he spoke, I understood that a forest warden doesn't simply oversee the land like a guard, but grows into the landscape the way a tree sends out its roots. He worships it in his own quiet way, without words or rituals, only through presence, daily, unwavering presence. He knows each clearing by name, not with words, but with feeling. Knows which in spring becomes too wet, becomes almost a lake, which in August dries hard as stone. He knows each spring, how to tell the difference in their voice, whether they murmur or sing, each streambed with its hidden fish, each secret path used only by the deer, those ways no human soul will ever see. The forests aren't a job for him, not really, but a promise he's made to himself, renewed each year. A promise to be there, to pay attention, to breathe when the forests exhale, to protect not through strength or power, but through presence, through the sheer knowledge that someone's looking, that someone sees, that it matters. I asked him how long he'd been doing it, and he hesitated, as though I'd asked him how long he'd been breathing, or how long the roots of the forest had been in the earth. He smiled quietly, a smile like rain on water, barely visible but profound, and said the question was wrongly phrased. Not how long, but how many times has he done it? How many times has he stepped out, put his leg over the threshold of the hut, even when it rained and the sky was gray like old paint, even when it was cold and his fingers grew brittle in his gloves, even when no other human would ever see what he did, even if the world at home ignored his whole life. Perhaps the trees are writing it down, he said, in their rings, year by year. But they tell no one. The trees are silent. The same round every day, the same check, each corner, every boundary marker. And yet every day different, because the seasons shape everything. The weather comes and goes like thoughts. The animals act on their rhythm, not ours. Everything changes, daily. That's the point, he said. Not perfection, not success, not a harvest, but presence. To be there, again and again. Until you yourself become part of the forest, until the boundaries disappear, until you no longer know where the human ends and the forest begins. And I saw that the work of a forest warden isn't only physical, that the legs aren't the only thing working, but the mind too, a kind of constant meditation, a conversation with the invisible. He spoke of the tiredness that sometimes comes after months without rest, when the body grows heavy as lead and the eyes burn from sleep deprivation, but also of the fulfillment of moments no pay could replace when he witnesses something rare, sees an invisible animal, perhaps only a feather that shouldn't be there, watches a birth in the forest. All these moments, glimpses of grace that no other humans see, that he can't share with others because words aren't enough, but that fulfill him deeply, to the bones, to the marrow, to the quietest corners of his heart. He then showed me a photograph on his old mobile phone, a device that looked older than the man himself, with a scratched display on which you could still make out details. A lynx just emerging from a bush, not fast, not aggressive, just watchful, its eyes golden and sharp, like two stones that have caught fire, that shine in the darkness. He said he'd never touched this animal, never granted it physical closeness. Closeness was only photographic. This distance that isn't cold, but respect, sacred distance. But he's observed it over years, seasons, generations. He already knows the children of this lynx and the children of its children, he said. Each one, their personalities different, some bolder, some more cautious. And the observing alone, without touching, without disturbing, without ever truly influencing the animal, that taught him what it means to truly belong, not possessively, but humbly. To belong to a place, not because you live there, not because you have papers in a drawer, but because you're attentive there, loyal, because you look, truly look, because you understand that you're only a guest, a fortunate guest, but a guest who watches, who preserves the forest's trust. We spoke of climate change, of the forests growing thinner year by year, of the birds arriving later, their voices grown weaker, of the mosses no longer damp enough, withering like old paper. But he didn't speak of it with fear, not with despair or resignation, but with the quiet determination of someone who's committed to something, a lifetime, without knowing if it'll be enough in the end, and who does it anyway, every day anew. He's accepted, and that's a form of wisdom, I suppose, that he can't save everything, that there are greater forces, powerful, cosmic forces, stronger than the hand of a man, than a small human voice in the great forest. But he saves something every day, through his mere presence there in the forests, through attention, a damaged clearing that he tends, a fallen tree he brings back into the cycle, a spring he renaturalizes that flows again. That's enough, he said, not full of hope, but full of clarity. It has to be enough. And if it isn't enough, well, then it will be enough for the people who come after me, perhaps their children, their grandchildren, to understand that someone tried, that someone looked, that it wasn't indifferent. The train had long since left the hills behind, and the landscape grew flatter, less dramatic, more civilized, more tamed. The houses came closer, villages, factories, power lines like cobwebs over green ground. The fields became more geometric, more planned, divided into squares, quite different from the wild slopes where nothing human dictates order. But the Forest Warden still gazed outward, not at the landscape passing outside, not at this tamed world, but through it, into the forests of his soul, his body, his memory, I suppose. His gaze was unfocused, not absent, but very present, but far away, 1,000 kilometers away. Perhaps he was thinking of the tracks still to check, of the lynx prints he'd see next week, of the boundaries between protected area and hunting zone that had to be redrawn daily, like an invisible chessboard in the forest. Of the plants that would flower next month, the moonflowers when the nights grew warm enough, when the earth released its reserves. Perhaps he was already home in his mountains. In his body sits another man still, a traveler, but his soul was already there, between the trees, listening. The nearness to the forests was already enough to draw him there, like a magnet, like a promise made to oneself. And then he fell asleep, quite suddenly. His head fell gently against the window with a barely audible click, and his breathing became deep and regular, the way the trees breathe, the way the forest itself breathes. A very faint smile lay on his face, the smile of someone who knows that everything is in its right place, that the forests continue, that the lynx tracks will be visible again tomorrow. It was the smile of someone who feels protected by something great, not by people, not by institutions, not by laws, but by the quiet, never-ending task that drives him out into the forests again each morning, that holds him, that defines him, that secures him. His hands rested on his lap, these hands, these wonderful tools that must feel so much, touch bark, read tracks, set stones. And in his sleep, they were finally relaxed, were no longer working but resting, were only hands, warm, still, ready for tomorrow.
The train carries on, ta-dum, ta-dum.
The wheels follow their own tracks, endless, like the paths of the forest that never end, that only branch, that only deepen with time, with decades, with generations. And I sit here and realize that attention is a form of love, perhaps the purest form. Real love, not the romantic kind you read about in poems or see at the cinema, but the daily, quiet love that remains unadorned, that never gets applause. You don't have to own something to protect it. Don't have to write your name on paper. Don't have to have a certificate. You only have to see it, really see it. With the eyes of this forest warden who looks hour by hour, year by year, who wants to understand what lives there, what breathes there, and then always return to the places where you belong. Not because you work there, not from duty, but because you're needed there. Because the silence there is waiting and hopeful. Because the trees know that someone's coming. The forest breathes, and I breathe with it. Ta-dum, ta-dum. Like a heart that never stops, the warmth of the train around me, the windowsill cool against my shoulder, the gentle darkness outside, impenetrable really, full of life. Everything becomes slow, so slow. The thoughts grow heavy, the eyes sink, and I glide away between waking and dream, where the forest warden still stands between the trees, waiting, lovingly. The rattle of the wheels reminded me tonight of something, of a train many years ago, perhaps 30 years, a lifetime, on this same line from Munster to Ham on an autumn evening. One of those evenings when the sun sank beneath the fields, slowly, resignedly, and everything was gold, everything orange, everything the light of farewell, the light of something ending, saying goodbye. I was sitting alone in the compartment, or thought I was alone with my thoughts, alone with my soul, when an older woman entered, tall and upright, with a kind of dignity that time cannot take away, that time cannot touch, that's older than time itself. Her hair was white like silk, fine and soft as cotton, like snow, like innocence, and her eyes were gray like old photographs, gray like the past, like time, like memory itself. She wore a dark red coat, the red not of passion or youth, but of depth, of experience, of lived years, of a life lived. And she held an old photo album in her hands, large, heavy, worn, not the way you carry a book casually, but the way you carry a precious relic, like a precious wafer, like something that's sacred, that you must keep close, that you must protect, that you cannot drop, that you cannot lose. She sat across from me, with consideration, slowly, sacredly, and opened the album without asking me, without asking permission, without pleasantries. It was as if this were her ritual, her rite, her moment, her time, her space, in which the world pauses. "Forgive me," she said softly, without really looking at me, without addressing me directly, as if speaking to herself, to the past, to the dead, to the man who was no longer there. "But I must look at it. I must. This place, this train, this line, Münster to Ham, it's an important line for me. The most important line, the most sacred line. Not because of the landscape, not because of the stations, but because of the memory, because of him. Every autumn when I travel here, every year, reliably, without fail, I look at these photographs. It's a ritual, not religious, but sacred, not ecclesiastical, but sacred. A prayer, you might say, not to God, but to him, to the past, to the love that remains, that doesn't die. A way of saying, silently, to myself, not for others, I remember, I don't forget. You were here, you were real, you were loved, you loved me. That was true.
The photographs were old, black and white, yellowed by the years, by the decades, by time lying over them like snow. The edges worn as if by hands, by soft, loving hands, that had touched them many times, that had studied them like a scholar his favorite book, like a nun her Bible, like someone who can't let go of the past because the past is the only thing that remains. The first photograph showed a young man, perhaps 30, perhaps less, young at any rate, full of life and hope, in a uniform from 1945, not from war, not from the war, but from the beginning of peacetime, when uniforms still held hope, when everything was still possible. "My husband," she said softly, and her voice became very soft, very tender, older, as if a different self were speaking, a self from the past. "Carl, this train on this line, that was our train. It wasn't just a train, it was our beginning. It was the place where he told me, not at the station, not before departure, but as we traveled, as the train moved, as the landscape slipped past, that he loved me, that he would marry me. Not with grand words, not on one knee, not with an expensive ring. We had no ring. We had nothing but ourselves and hope and the train and this line. He simply said, so naturally, as if speaking of the weather, 'Miss, would you like to go to Ham? And perhaps further after that? Perhaps with me? Forever?' And I said yes, quickly, without thinking, without hesitation, from the heart, from the gut, true and honest. Yes, yes, Carl, yes. And 2 years later, only 2 years, we married in a small church with just a few guests, because the war had just ended, because the world was still confused, because everything was still chaotic. But love was pure, was strong, was true." She turned the pages, slowly, lovingly, sacredly, photograph after photograph, page after page, as if walking through a life, as if telling a story that only she still knows, that only she still preserves, that only she still understands. A house, a simple, beautiful house with a garden. Children, 3 children, all laughing, all bright, all blonde, like their father, like Carl, who is now dead, who now exists only in photographs. Carl with an axe, laughing, healthy, alive, proud of the wood he'd gathered, proud of the work of his hands, of the life he lived. The woman, herself, younger, with whiter hair, but still young, still beautiful, still full of hope and strength and life and love. Decades compressed in images, thin as paper, fragile as old treasures, brittle as life itself, as time. "He died," she said, and a voice broke. 16 years ago. 16 years without him. Suddenly, a heart attack, suddenly. No warning, no chance to say goodbye, no chance to say one more word. And since then, every year, like a ritual, like a sacred task, I travel this line. I look at these photographs, page by page, and I remember. I speak with him. It's not sad, or it is, but it's also sweet, also precious, also sacred, also necessary. That's love. Love remains, but the man goes. The photographs remain, the memory remains. So I sit here in this train, on this line, and I speak with him. The photographs are my answer to his silence. The album is our letter, our dialogue without words, our conversation across time, our proof that love doesn't die. "You see?" she said, pointing to a photograph that said everything, that told the whole story in one image, where Carl was playing with her son, lifting him onto his shoulders, spinning him with laughter and life, and the son was laughing so hard he could cry, laughing from deep in his belly with all the joy of a child. Here, that's him with our son. That was his favorite moment, his son in his arms, laughing, alive, loving. Our son is now older than his father was when he died, older with gray hair himself, with his own sons and daughters. I have grandchildren, 4 grandsons, 3 granddaughters, 7 small people who never knew Carl, who only have a photograph of him, only the voice of my memory. The grandchildren don't know their grandfather, not really, only from photographs like this, only from the stories I tell them, which grow smoother with time, more general, less real, more fairy tale than story. But in these photographs, in these old, beloved pages, in this album which is my whole life, in it, he's immortal. He doesn't grow older, he doesn't get sick, he doesn't grow tired, he isn't forgotten. He's always Carl, always young, always alive, always laughing, always present. Here, on these pages, in this album, in my heart, in my life. Her hand touched a photograph gently, touched it the way you touch something sacred, where Carl was laughing, so genuinely, so full of life, so impossible now that he's gone, now that he's dead, now that 16 years have passed. The train fell into the rhythm of the autumn night. Ta-dum, ta-dum, ta-dum. And the woman turned the pages, page after page, speaking quietly to her husband, to the photographs, to the past. Words that only she and the photographs understood, that no one else could hear, that no one else needed to hear, that are a secret between her and her dead husband. "I'm not going to Ham," she said suddenly. And now she looked at me, really looked, acknowledged my existence, made me a witness. "I'm not going anywhere. This isn't a journey, it's a pilgrimage. I'm traveling into the past, on this line, with this train. And there I sit beside my husband, and we're young, so young, and everything is still possible. The future is open like a window, like a door, like a possibility. And when the train arrives, when we arrive, then I'm old again, alone again, and he's still gone, still dead. And the grief comes back, grabs me, pulls me down. But I've seen him, one more time in my life. I've felt him again, his newness, his love, his presence. I've had him lovingly, truly had him for these hours, in this train, on this line, in this magical time, before reality returns and takes everything away." She closed the album gently, the way you cover a sleeping child, the way you close a grave with dignity, the way you cover a heart that's been open too long, that suffered too much pain, and the pages fell together like wings. Her eyes were wet, not with tears, not really, but with moisture, with emotion, with love, with time, with all the years that had rushed past. But she didn't cry, not here, not where someone was watching, just was soft, transparent, touched, deeply touched by time and memory, by the album, by her dead husband, by the life that was lived. The train rolled on through the autumn night, and I saw how the autumn lights slipped past, golden and final and beautiful, lights from villages, from life, from people sleeping, dreaming, loving. And I wasn't sad, not despairing, but comforted, reassured, filled with a quiet wisdom, because I knew, finally understood, that love doesn't end, never ends. It only changes form, becomes something else, becomes photographs, becomes rituals, becomes a sacred journey on a certain train, at a certain time, on a certain line, Munster to Ham, with a certain person who is dead and yet alive, who is gone and yet present, who exists only in the photographs and yet is as real as anything that's real,
perhaps more real. And my eyes grew heavy, heavy as lead, heavy, grateful for this sorrow that is also love, because I understood that memory is also a kind of life, that grief is also a kind of love, that the album is also a kind of home, a safe place. And ta-dum, ta-dum, ta-dum. The train carries us all home, the living and the dead, the present and the absent, all together, all connected, slowly, surely, gently, home, to sleep, to peace. On the line from Koblenz to Cochem on an autumn evening, one of those evenings when the sun sinks beneath the earth like into blood, when the sky was orange like an old bowl, ancient, fragile, full of history and time, we were almost alone in the compartment. Just myself and an older man, gray and still and present, sitting at the window and saying nothing, not moving, doing nothing but watch the landscape. The Rhine, the great river, the sacred river, lay beside the track, dark and mysterious, moss green and deep lit, and mist rose from it like ghosts, like the souls of the dead who aren't yet ready to disappear, who want one more night with the world, who want to see once more what it is to breathe, to be. We traveled long. The compartment was warm, too warm, overheated by the radiator. I began to doze. My eyes grew heavy, my head nodded, until the train suddenly slowed its pace, slowly, surely, and I knew immediately what was coming. The long iron bridge, the bridge before Cochem, the bridge that crosses the Rhine. The rattle began, suddenly, hard, unprepared, like a cry of the earth, as if the world were changing, as if everything would become different, as if time were speeding up. Not the normal, familiar rattle of wheels on rails, the gentle, rhythmic beat, the soft rolling I was accustomed to, that I loved, that carried me, but a completely different rattle, wilder, more primal, as if the soul of the earth were speaking, as if the train were transforming into something else, something greater, something sacred. Deeper, resonant, as if the train were riding on an infinite drum, as if an instrument were speaking that for 1,000 years, for 10,000 years, had been silent, that now found its ancient voice, the voice of time itself, the old voice. Sound, 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 a perfect, relentless rhythm, deep and round and overwhelming, not mathematical but organic, drowning out everything else, killing everything else, erasing everything else, giving the world a new heart, a new rhythm, a new truth, a new reality, the only thing that's real. The man at the window closed his eyes, slowly, thoughtfully, humbly, as if surrendering, as if knowing that something great was coming, that God was speaking now. I saw his mouth move, not speaking, not talking, but singing softly with the rhythm, with the sacred rhythm, with the sound, quietly, only his lips, barely audible, an echo of the world, a prayer. His head nodded slightly. Ta-dum, ta-dum. The rhythm of wheels on the bridge, the rhythm of the heart, the rhythm of life itself, and then doubled, faster, more intense, wilder. Ta-dum-dum, ta-dum-dum, ta-dum-dum. The tempo increased, the world accelerated, the heart beat faster, faster, life pulsed, the universe breathed. The rattle was hypnotic, intoxicating, like music, like a drug, like life itself. It was as if the train were no longer moving, but the whole world were moving beneath us, shaking, beginning to tremble, waking us all from our everyday sleep, shaking us all awake, showing us that we're still alive. The rhythm was perfect, not human, not artificial, but perfect the way nature is perfect, relentless, mathematical, like the heart of the earth itself, like the blood of God, like the music that plays everywhere if we just listen. I could no longer hear my own heart. It disappeared. Only the rattle existed now, only the rhythm, only the bridge, only this one moment. Sound, sound, sound. Like a bell, like the end of the world, like the birth of a new universe. And beneath the bridge flowed the Rhine, dark, wild, old, ancient, older than the bridge, older than the land. And over it we flew, over the water, over history, over time. And it was as if the rattle were washing away everything old, everything confused, everything broken, everything damaged, would make everything new, would heal everything. It was like an exorcism, to drive it out, the evil, the pain, the fear. It was like healing, like when a wound closes, like when light comes after darkness, like when a soul finds itself again. As the bridge carried us, over the Rhine, over history, over time, over all the lives that ever lived, I understood that this wasn't just a moment, but a transformation, an enlightenment, a revelation. The bridge carried more than just a train. It carried life itself, the whole, complete, full life. It carried love, hope, sorrow, joy, ecstasy, all the things that make a person, that make them human, that make them sacred. The Rhine beneath us wasn't just water, wasn't just a geographical feature, but time itself. Not just a river, but life that flows, eternal, that never stands still, that's forever in motion, that's like God's breath. And we, this old man at the window and I, this young traveler, we were part of it, fully integrated, part of this great rhythm, part of this sacred music, part of the world's heartbeat. I understood, suddenly, completely, that this was the meaning of everything, the purpose of all things. That connection, that rhythm, that music, the heart, was the only thing that really mattered. The rattle of the bridge was the answer to every question. The rattle was the truth itself. The rattle was everything. The man opened his eyes, slowly, reluctantly, as if he didn't want to wake from the dream, as the rattle ended, suddenly gone, vanished like a dream, like a vision, like something that wasn't real, that you can't hold, that will soon be forgotten. The train was back on solid ground, back to normal, back to ordinary, back to gray and tired and everyday. The rattle was the only thing that remained, not outside, but inside, in the ear, in the heart, in the depths of the body where rhythm lives, where pulse is, where the music of life plays, where God breathes. His gaze at me was different now, different than before, different than anything, as if he'd never seen me, or had just now seen me for the first time, or didn't know if I was real, or if I was just a dream too, an echo of the bridge. "Every time," he said very quietly, so quietly that I had to lean forward, that I had to open my whole soul to hear him. "Every time over the bridge, I think, I feel that this is like a hand that touches everything, blesses everything. The hand of time, the hand of God, or perhaps the face of God, who knows? The Rhine knows about it, the bridge knows it, the old bridge crossed 1,000 times. The train knows it, the train that travels its whole life. And I remember it, suddenly, forcefully, sacredly, that I'm alive. That's everything, that's all that matters. Only this moment, these seconds, the rhythm, the rattle, the heart. That's everything, that's real, that's the truth. That's all that counts." And as the train flew on, fast, quiet, peaceful, into the autumn night, the lights of Kokum behind us, I could still hear the rattle, not with my ears, not with my physical hearing, but with my body, my blood, my breath, my deepest self, my heart, the center of my soul. The rattle was everywhere, in everything. Not just the rattle of the bridge, but the rattle of time itself, the rattle of existence, the pulse of the universe, God's heartbeat. The train fell back into its old, gentle rhythm, ta-dum, ta-dum, ta-dum. Slowly, surely, the way it always was, the way it always will be. And I wasn't sad, not confused, not lost, not alone. The rattle, this magical, sacred, impossible music, had cleansed everything, all doubt, all questions, all fear, had cleared everything, enlightened everything, reminded me, brought me back to myself. And I could rest now, heavy, sure, completely, fully, finally certain that life has this rhythm, this pulse, this heartbeat, this music, this melody. And this rhythm is it, this pulse that carries you, that holds you, that keeps you safe, that brings you home, to safety, to rest, to peace, to sleep, to dream, to God.
On the line from Leipzig to Halle, late in the winter night. So late that it was no longer night, but the thing beyond night, the thing that comes before dawn. When the sky was so black it became invisible, when the distinction between outside and inside was lost, when you couldn't tell where the air ended and where the night began. I met a receptionist, a woman who worked in hotels, who met people, who gave out keys, who listened. She wasn't young, perhaps 60, perhaps older than she looked, or younger, I couldn't say, and it wasn't important, not really. What mattered was that her face was the face of someone who'd spent much time awake in the night, far too much, a whole lifetime, 20 years of night, 20 years of wakefulness. The kind of face that belongs to the night the way stars belong to the sky, the way the moon belongs to the night, the way all things belong to things that glow in the darkness. She wore a dark uniform, dark blue, neat, well-kept, but with small, beloved signs of wear. A spot on the collar where the fabric had faded slightly from 20 years of uniforms, a small seam that had come loose, grown weary. Her eyes were very alert, very present, not tired, not sleepy, no, alive, bright, open, even though it was 3 a.m, even though the time when normal people sleep had long come and gone. She worked at a large hotel in Halle, a 5-star hotel that was Art Deco, with old, elegant structures mixed with modern, comfortable improvements. And she'd been working every night for 20 years, always every night, the same shift, year after year, the same uniform, the same love, the same presence. "I love the night," she said to me. And it wasn't a claim, not a question seeking confirmation, not something I should believe, but a simple, absolutely true statement, like saying snow is white, the earth is round, that things are as they are, undeniable and real. The night is different, completely different, a different world. People are different. In the day they're fast, hurried, loud, demanding, impatient, scattered, torn in all directions. When night comes, when the deep night comes, when everyone else is sleeping, at night they're gentle as babies, without defense, without mask. They don't demand anymore. They're grateful, truly grateful when you help them, when you listen. They're small and weak like children. A small kindness at night, that's worth a lot, not like in the day when kindness is cheap. It can save someone. It can keep someone alive. She told me stories from her nights, not as light anecdotes, not as little story charges, but like prayers, like serious, deep prayers, like litanies of human weakness and human strength, both at once. Businessmen who wake in the middle of the night, suddenly awake, panicked, and can't sleep, and who come down into the lobby with red, closed eyes, and they simply sit here on this sofa, and they talk to a woman they don't know, the receptionist. They tell her their fears, existential fears, financial fears, about their children they don't understand, about their marriages beginning to break, slowly falling apart. They wouldn't have talked to her, never, not in the day, not in the light when the whole world is watching. But the night makes you truthful, makes you honest, makes you naked. A couple who fight during the day, loudly, who are sharp with each other, hard, critical, almost deadly. But at night, at 2 o'clock, in the deepest night, unnoticed, when they think really nobody's looking, They hold hands. Hands. They cling to each other like drowning people, like people saving themselves from drowning, like people holding on to love, to the only thing that really matters.
"An old woman," the receptionist said, and her voice grew even softer, even more tender. "Comes down to the lobby every night at 2 o'clock. Every night, never misses. She wears an old dress, a black dress, old, that speaks of mourning, and her hair is carefully combed, as if she's still making an effort, even though she's alone, even though nobody's watching. She goes to the door, slowly, considerately, and looks out at the street. She's not looking to see, but to remember, to be, to feel. I always ask her if I can help, if she needs anything. She says no, thank you. She just wants to sit, just wants to see the night, just wants to be with the night, just wants to feel the night. I know, without her telling me, that her husband has died. I know, from the way she wears the black dress, from the pain in her eyes, that she can't sleep anymore, that sleep is too heavy, that dreams are too painful. And the night is the only time she can feel alone, not lonely, that's a difference. Not abandoned, but alone with the night, with the stars, with her husband somewhere out there. The night is her friend. The night understands her. "My daughter," the receptionist said. And now there was a hint of concern in her voice, a concern born of love. "She always asks me why I don't work in the day, why I don't have a better life, more money, more prestige, more time with the family, with her, with my grandchildren. But she doesn't understand, can't understand, because she's young. Nightlife is better, much better. That's not less, that's not a lack or a failure, that's just different. A different world, a different way of being. At night, you come to know people, not their facades, not their masks, not the things they show. A businessman at 8 in the morning, stern in his expensive suit, his mobile, his importance, his success. That's not the real man. That's a mask, a performance, a role he's playing. But at 2 in the morning, in the deepest night, when his defenses are gone, when he comes down and whispers to me, as if he's ashamed, that he's afraid of tomorrow, deeply afraid, that he doesn't know if he'll keep his job, that he doesn't understand his son, that his life has failed. That's the real man, the frightened, vulnerable, naked, real man. And I sit beside him, on this sofa, and I say nothing. I say nothing, and that's enough. That's all he needs." Outside, the lights of Hala slipped past. Single windows, still lit in this deepest winter night, warm and golden. Rooms where people were still awake, or dreaming, or loving, or suffering, or dying, or being born. I thought of all the people moving in these lights, unaware that somewhere a night receptionist sits and takes over the world, while they sleep, while they dream, while they fall back into their innocence, their vulnerability, their truth. "That's my church," she said quietly. So quietly I had to lean forward, almost to herself, almost like a prayer, the words of a sacred person. The night lobby, the silence, the sofa, the door, the people who come to me when they can't go on, when everything is too heavy, when life is no longer worth living. That's everything, that's really everything I need to live. That's enough for me, that's more than enough. That's all that makes sense. And as the train flew through the winter night, fast, sure, rhythmic, and the receptionist was sleeping now, or pretending to sleep, her eyes closed, her hands folded, I grew tired, not from work, not from physical exhaustion, but from compassion for this woman who'd stayed awake so long she'd become night herself, who carried silence within her like treasure, who knew what people needed without them saying it, what people hoped for without hoping it, what people loved without showing it. Slowly, deeply, quiet as a snowfall, quiet as a prayer. And I fell asleep, warmed by her presence, protected by her silence, carried by her love, grateful, deeply grateful, that there are people who stay awake, who watch, so others can sleep, so others can dream, so the world is safe.
I met the silent woman on the Hamburg to Kiel line on a winter morning before the sun rose, when the world was still dark and everything was black and gray, everything dark and impossible. She sat at the window seat, exactly where I was going, at the window seat that could have been called mine, but she was already sitting there, was already there, as if she'd always been there. But she didn't look up at me, not questioning, not annoyed, not unfriendly. She simply didn't look at me, so I simply sat down across from her, without asking, without words. She was small, very still, barely more than a shadow in the dark night, with gray hair bound in a thick braid, old, careful, a braid that had held for many years, and the hair smelled of something I couldn't name, not oil, not soap, not flour, but of time, of years, of life. She wore a green coat, very old. The color had already faded, had turned gray-green. It was a coat that had made many journeys, knew many stations, had met many people. And gloves, black ones, that had also done long service, worn, tattered at the edges, but still warm, you could see, still functional, still ready to give warmth. I sat down across from her, my suitcase up in the rack, my old jacket beside me, wrinkled, warm. And she said not a word. Not hello, not good morning, not please sit. Not unkindly, not... She wasn't cruel, not heartless, but also not inviting, not with a smile, not with a look that says welcome. She just kept gazing out at the dark landscape, which slowly grew grayer, became light gray, became dark gray light, while the sun prepared to come, prepared to rise, slowly climbed up behind the fields. And we sat together, hour after hour, and we didn't speak. Not a word fell, not a single syllable. And it wasn't embarrassing, not awkward, not unpleasant. No music, no radio, no sound from others, just the train and the wheels, ta-dum, ta-dum, ta-dum. The rhythm, the beat, the heart of the train that carried us, that held us. It's a rare thing that two strangers, two completely unknown people, sit together for hours and say nothing. And it's not unpleasant, not awkward, not embarrassing, not awkward. You'd think it had to be unpleasant. We're social beings. Human nature demands speech, communication, exchange, small talk, any words at all. But it wasn't. It was as though we'd made a silent agreement, without words, without anyone saying anything, without me needing to say it or her needing to say it. It was just there, this agreement. We're here, both alone, both on this journey, both on the way to somewhere, to some destination. And that's enough. That's perfect. That's more than enough. We don't need to fill what's already full, what's already fulfilled, with silence, with respect. The air is not empty when two people sit together without speaking, without communicating with words. The air is full of understanding, of genuine comprehension, full of what could be said, but doesn't need to be. What remains unsaid is more beautiful, stays more beautiful. At 7 o'clock in the morning, I looked at my watch. It was exactly 7 o'clock, 7:15 seconds. The woman opened a small bag, a patchwork bag. The leather was cracked, was old, was worn by time and travel. From her bag, she pulled out a roll. The roll looked warm, still warm almost, fresh almost, as though she'd just baked it or had just bought it. And a very old knife. It was antique, it was precious. The handle was silver, was worn, was faded, was a knife with history. She cut the roll very carefully into half pieces, not arbitrarily, not randomly, but with intention, with purpose, with attention. In the middle, evenly, perfectly, so that each half was equal. And she ate, without hurrying, slowly, methodically, and chewed each piece completely through, completely, entirely, as though chewing were important, as though eating were a meditation, a prayer. And when she was finished, she offered me the other half, not asking, but giving, naturally, simply, the way you feed a child, the way you fulfill an old tradition. I took it without asking. We ate together, quietly, silently, still. And the sun began to rise, slowly, hesitantly, wondrously. And the light came red first, then orange, then yellow, soft colors, colors of hope. And the landscape became colorful, became colored, became alive.
Time passed, and I didn't notice how much time passed, how fast or how slow it passed. The morning became bright, grew brighter, grew more golden, became yellow and almost warm, like a blessing. We passed villages, small stations, other trains, life, other people on other journeys, other stories. But we seemed separated from all that, was in our bubble, our world, our silence. But we weren't moving, or it seemed we weren't, as though time stood still in this compartment, in this moment, in this present. And the silence between us didn't become unpleasant, didn't become oppressive, became ever more beautiful, grew ever richer, until I began to understand, to truly understand, why some people can live together for years without a word, without words being necessary, and are completely happy, completely fulfilled, completely satisfied in this silence, in this present. When the train arrived in Kiel, slowly, very slowly, braked, rolled into the station, the grass before the station, the platform approached. She stood up, slowly, not hurried, not hasty, arranged her coat, pulled it straight, checked that she hadn't forgotten anything, the old knife, the breadcloth, her money, her thoughts, her memories, and said to me, the first and only word she spoke in all those hours, in all these long hours of silence, in this whole journey from Hamburg to Kiel, these hours that were a life. It was the first voice I heard from her, and it was old and rough. It was a voice that had lived a lot, that had experienced a lot, but also gentle, incredibly gentle, like linen that's been washed long, that's old, that's soft. Thank you. One word, a single word, not thank you because you were nice, or thank you for the half of the roll, although that could have meant that too, although that could also have been part of the thanks. But thank you. Thank you because I'd been there, simply there, without overflowing, without speaking, without expecting, without needing, without changing her. Because I hadn't forced her to speak, not once, not with my eyes, not with my silence, not with my expectations. Because I'd understood that silence is also language, perhaps the only true language, the only real communication two people can conduct with each other, that two souls can conduct with each other. She left the train, and I watched her go down onto the dark platform, slowly, carefully, with dignity, the braids still bound, still neat, still gray and old and beautiful. The coat still green, still old, still lasting. The knife probably still in her bag, safe, closed, ready for the next roll, the next journey, the next meeting, the next silence. And I understood that some people don't need to travel, don't need to go from place to place, don't need to travel physically. Some people are already always on the way, even when they sit at a window seat and gaze out at the landscape, at the world, at the passing time. Ta-dum, ta-dum, ta-dum. And that's okay. That's right. That's natural. It's even beautiful, even wonderful. It's the most beautiful thing there is. Because silence isn't empty, isn't meaningless, isn't lacking. Silence is full, is fulfilled, is rich. Silence is a form of closeness, of intimacy, of genuine meeting.
the only form that really matters, that really remains, that really lives. I met the television repairman on the Leverkusen to Opladen line on a winter evening when the windows were fogged, wet, soiled, and the lights of the industrial cities flew past like yellow dots, like stars in darkness. And he was a man, an old man, who'd spent his whole life repairing televisions, not building them, but repairing, maintaining, healing. There aren't many of his kind left anymore. Almost all have retired or died, long dead, or given up, lost hope. But this man, he still repaired them with passion, with a toolbox full of tools, old pliers, old wires, old parts, the suitcase so worn and scratched, dented, that it was old enough to be history, to tell stories of decades, of houses, of people. He told me he started with tube televisions in the 50s after the war, with big boxes, heavy as furniture, dark, menacing, that could explode, dangerous if you weren't careful, if you didn't have respect, if you touched the wrong wires. Adventure every time, small dramas, risk, but also wonder when the light came. And now, he sighed deeply. I saw his body bend a little, saw how time showed itself. Now the televisions are so thin, so flat, so perfect that you can't repair them. Not really, not physically, not with hands. You can only replace them, throw out the old ones, toss them away into the trash, buy new ones, always new. The electronics aren't made for human touch, not for hands, not for fingers, not for tools. They're made to disappear. After 2 years, after 3, then they're obsolete, unimportant, rubbish. But he still has work, he said. His voice grew softer, more tender, as though speaking of children. Old people, older people like him, who aren't willing to abandon their televisions, not from frugality, not from stinginess, but from love, from genuine feeling, who say, "This television, it was my friend, my companion, my window. I saw the Apollo landing on this screen, 1969, the first time humans set foot on the moon, and I sat there alone and stared at that gray screen, and it was as though I'd touched the moon itself, as though I'd been part of history." My daughter was born, and I turned off the television, not important, not any more important, and drove to the hospital. This television has known my whole life, all my decades. It has seen me age, the wrinkles come, the hair turn gray. It can't just go away, not just be thrown out. I'd feel lost, alone without this television, in my room, with its light, with its news, with its voices. I asked him if this work makes him sad, if it makes him desperate, that modern electronics can't be repaired anymore, that everything's simply thrown away, disposed of like rubbish. He thought for a long time, a very long time. His eyes became very clear, glowing, thoughtful, and he said, "No, it's not sad. It's different. It's change." The work was always the same, bringing light to someone, literally light, into the darkness of their room, into their loneliness. Whether that comes from tube electronics, those big glassy tubes, those vacuums, or from a chip, small, infinitesimally small, invisible. It doesn't matter, really doesn't matter, it's not important. It's about the television lighting up again, the light coming back, and the person sits before it, redeemed, and knows they're not alone, that the world still exists outside their room, that there are people, that there is life. And I saw that this was something deep, a secret. The television is not just a machine, not just electronics and plastic and emptiness. It's a window to other worlds, yes, to stories, to dramas, to people who speak, who laugh, who cry, who live, but also a window that holds loneliness, that carries it, that supports it, that lovingly embraces it. When you're old and you live alone, and so many old people live alone, abandoned, forgotten, then the television is the only one who speaks to you, who just speaks without asking for a reply, who doesn't expect you to respond, to be engaged, who isn't offended when you're silent, who's just there, mute and faithful, year after year, like an old dog, like an old friend, who waits patiently.
He showed me a photo on his old phone. The display was scratched, cracks everywhere, but the photo was clear, very clear. An old lady, she looked 90 years old, 90 or more, sat in an armchair, a gray armchair, worn, before a large old television, black and white set from the 70s, robust, heavy, stable. And her hand touched the screen gently, not aggressively, not wildly, but lovingly, tenderly, as though touching a child. He said he'd repaired this lady, and I looked confused, and he laughed quietly, a playful laugh. "No," he said, laughing, "not the lady, the television. The television. That's my joke," he said. But when he left, after an hour's work, a difficult hour, the television was fixed, the picture was back, the brightness came back. She said to him, with tears in her eyes, "You saved me. My window was dark, black, empty, and now it's light again. You saved me, thank you. Thank you that I'm not alone. Thank you that I can see, that I hear, that I'm connected." The television repairman said that's the reason he keeps going, why he doesn't give up, why he keeps traveling with his tools. Not from nostalgia. He's not sentimental, this man, not soft, not romantic. But because it means he's still important, that his knowledge is still needed, that his hands still help, that there are still people like that old lady, who understand that a repair is an act of love, not just a craft activity, not just work. That you preserve something not because it's new, not because it's valuable, not because it's worth money, but because it's old and known and familiar, and because the person loves it, because it's part of their life, because it carries their story. The train pulled into Opladen slowly, braked, the wheels squealed, and he packed his old suitcase together very carefully, tool by tool. Each tool gets its place, finally closed tight, finished. And he smiled at me, not happy, not sad, not emotional, but like a man who knows his life and accepts it, who's at peace, who understood. And he said, his voice was calm, determined, "Somewhere a television is waiting for me that's dark, whose screen is black, dead, and the person sits before it and waits, hoping. And I'll go and bring light. That's my job. That's always been my job, since the first television. That will be my job until I can't walk anymore, until my hands are too weak." And he went out onto the cold platform. Opladen was cold, dark, gray, an industrial city in the night. And I watched him go down the steps, slowly, patiently, his suitcase in one hand, but with purpose, with intention, knowing where he's going, knowing that someone is waiting. And the train carries on into the night, into the cold night, into the dark night. And somewhere an old lady sits, watching a bright screen, watching light, watching images. And she's not alone anymore. Not today. Not for a long time yet. And that matters very much. That's perhaps the most important thing of all. The only thing that counts. And I think that we all try, in our own way, to bring light into the dark world, each of us, with our tools, our hands, our work, our love. Ta-dum, ta-dum. The rhythm of the train grows slower. And that's enough. It's sufficient. That's everything. It's enough. And my eyes grow heavy, and the screen before me is dark now. But that's not darkness, not fear. That's sleep. That's rest. Warm, deep, safe.
like a window closing. The light in this dining car brought me a moment back tonight, clear and sharp, as though it were happening right now, not colored by memory, on the Budapest to Vienna line, an old line, a line with history. It was winter, 1922, 100 years ago almost. The windows were frosted, ice on ice, and I was young and inexperienced in love, naive, hopeful. And I saw a couple sitting at a table under a lamp that made the light so warm, so golden, that it looked like gold, as though the lamp itself were made of honey, of beeswax, of light itself. It was Orient Express elegance, crystal glasses, heavy, expensive, white tablecloths, starched, spotless, cutlery heavy with silver, with history, with decades in this one train, this legend. It was an old couple, but not old in the sense that time had worn them, used them up, damaged them. No, time had polished them, refined them, like a tool used for 100 years. They were old the way a great house is old, not crumbling, not cracked, not decayed, but solid, known, safe, familiar, with stable foundations you can count on. Their hands lay on the table, close together but not touching, not holding, not from fear but just present, just there, as though nearness itself were enough, as though the air between them connected them in invisible ways. And between them lay a menu, heavy, cardboard, with gold lettering, that they both looked at. Their eyes followed the words, or so it seemed, though it was visible, obvious, that neither of them read a word, that the words didn't matter. They weren't looking at the menu. They were looking through the menu, at each other, through paper, straight into the other's eyes. The waiter came, in all his elegance. In his white gloves, he waited, patiently, professionally. The man opened his mouth to speak. I saw his chin move, the words forming. But the woman laid her hand on his, very lightly, just 2 fingers on the back of his hand, not pressing, but gentle, and said with firm, sure voice, "The same as always." Not questioning, not uncertain, not hesitant, not feeling, saying, knowing. And the man smiled, as though he'd expected this, exactly this, as though this were part of a ballet, a tango, a choreography they'd performed 1,000 times, 1,000 nights perhaps, 100 years together. The waiter nodded formlessly and disappeared into the kitchen, and it was as though nothing extraordinary had happened, for the waiter, for the other guests, for the world, which never looks. But I knew I'd just witnessed something extraordinary. A form of love so subtle you could barely see it, so quiet you needed silence to understand it. I couldn't resist. I had to ask. And I asked her, the woman, how long they'd been married, how long this love story lasted. She answered without looking at me, still gazing at the man, her eyes not leaving him, not for a moment, even as she spoke to me, even as she answered. "Since we were children. That was 40 years ago. 40 years. The word 40 had weight in my ears, heavy as a stone, like a medal, like a state of grace. 40 years sitting with one person. 40 years of having the same menu, the same script, the same words, the same courses. 40 years of wanting the same thing every day, needing the same thing, eating the same thing. Become routine, become meditation. And yet every day different, because the years changed, because age changed. 40 years because the food doesn't matter, is not important. The person beside you is important, only them." The man looked at me then, for the first time in our conversation, and his eyes were very gentle, full of kindness, full of pity for my youth, my naivete. And he said, slowly, carefully, as though giving counsel, "The secret isn't that we always love each other, not literally always. There are days, weeks sometimes, when love sleeps, when feelings grow cold, when you're simply faithful, not warm. The secret is that we've learned not to disappoint each other. Not big disappointments. Love survives mistakes, survives big mistakes even, survives infidelity.
but the small disappointments, the daily ones, the creeping ones that you forget, that you promise and don't keep, that you listen but don't hear, not really. We've learned not to do that, to avoid it. And that sounds weaker at first, but it's much stronger, much more important. A big disappointment you can forgive given time, but not disappointing each other, never disappointing again. That's fidelity. That's love.
The food came, carried by waiters in white gloves, on white plates, with sauce, with garnish, with art. This food looked expensive, looked important, looked precious. But it seemed not to interest them, not really interest them. They ate very slowly, methodically, not hurried, very attentively, as if the food were a meditation object. And they didn't speak, the whole time they didn't, not a word, not once. But their feet, I could see their feet under the table, hidden under the white tablecloth, their shoes almost hidden by shadow. Their feet touched gently, constantly, not by chance, but like routine, like dialogue without words, a language only bodies understand. The left leg touches the right, then back, then again and again. A music, a rhythm, a communication only their bodies understood. Only they understood. And I saw that that's the highest form of love, not speaking, not grand gestures, not complaining or defending, but silence, the gentle silence, the quiet silence, the silence unafraid of silence, of the other's nearness. The dining car steward brought the bill, small, elegant, on a silver tray, discreetly presented, and as he set it between them on the table, between their plates, the woman still said nothing, was silent, still. The man nodded, paid, no words, no discussion, no negotiation. He'd learned that words were less than action, that action was love. And I asked myself as I watched whether happiness comes from agreement, from harmony, or from silence, from the ability to be quiet. Perhaps the same. Perhaps silence is the highest sign of agreement. Later, as we all left that dining car, the train was approaching Vienna in the night. I could already see the lights, the first suburbs, the city's poverty and wealth. We were almost at our destination at this night. I watched them put on each other's coats, very carefully, very tenderly, as though dressing a child for the cold night, or wrapping a precious picture to protect it. The man lifted the woman's coat, guided her arms through the sleeves carefully, not quickly, and whispered something. I didn't hear what. His words were only for her. And her face smiled, a soft smile, the smile of someone being heard. Then it was reversed, the man's coat, her hands, her tenderness, and their hands perhaps met by chance while buttoning up, while fastening. Or perhaps nothing was chance between them, nothing. Perhaps it was all planned for 40 years. And I understood that marriage isn't something you live, not literally experience like an event, but something you build every day, very patiently, very quietly, without grand gestures, without drama, without echo, only in silence, where real things happen, where love breathes. And I'm back on today's train, 100 years later, almost exactly. And the light isn't golden as then, not like honey, but it's warm, it's there. And I still see those two people looking at each other, silently, quietly, completely, wholly. And I think that love is perhaps not what I thought then, not what youth believes. Love isn't the rapid heartbeat, not the fluttering, not the desperation I felt when young, that violent, chaotic emotion. Love is quiet breathing next to someone. To dumb. The rhythm of time, year after year, decade after decade. The lungs synchronized, the heartbeat in accord, without thought, without effort. And when you grow old, you simply sit next to the person and are quiet. And the silence is filled with 40 years,
filled with 1,000 dining car meals, filled with touches. And that's everything. That's enough. That's more than enough. That's heaven. I met the dry stone builder on the Porrentray to Delimon line on a spring evening when the air was still cool, but with a kind of promise of warmth, as though the earth were slowly waking, as though hope were coming. She was a woman of about 65, with broad shoulders and a back that was straight, not from the gym, not from posture, but from years, decades, in which you stand upright before stones, in which gravity struggles with you. Her hands were wonderful, wonderful in their hardness, in their strength. The hands of someone who's spent a whole life moving stones, touching them, accompanying them, who understands stones. Her fingernails were dark with dirt, dark brown, almost black, discolored. And it seemed to me they'd never really be clean, not with water and soap, that they carried the color like a badge. And that wasn't important, wasn't sad. The dirt was part of the work, part of the identity, part of the authenticity, part of the love for stones. She said that she builds dry stone walls in the Jura Mountains, everywhere in this region where farmers still have their borders, where land's still paved with stones, not with cement, not with modern mortar. That's an art that's almost gone, she said, an art that dies with people like me, the last generation perhaps. Young people don't want to learn anymore, don't have the patience to place a stone so precisely, millimeter perfect, so that it holds without mortar, firm, secure, so that it speaks with its neighbors, shares their weight, carries them, so that the wall can breathe. Yes, breathe, that's the right word, the word for the secret. So that water flows through when it rains, so that moisture doesn't back up, so that the wall lives, so that water flows through and the wall still stands, steadfast, 100 years, 200 years, generations, centuries, and no one has to repair it, no one has to clean behind it, renew it. That's the art. That's the miracle. She showed me her hands again, not with pride, not for show, not theatrically, but with a kind of dedication, a kind of love, a kind of humility. She said that a stone tells you everything if you learn to listen. If you're ready to bend, to learn the language stones speak, the old language. The roughness on one side, rough, splintered, that's meant for the next hole that will fit, the notch, the indent. The smoother edges on the other, smooth, polished by water, by time, meant for the air, for the wind, for water to flow. The weight. The weight is important. The weight tells you intuitively whether this stone wants to be below, heavy, holding, or above, light, free. The way it fits in the palm of a hand, exactly so, millimeter, no other position, there's only one truth. And then you must know where this stone wants to be, not where you want it, not where it suits you, where it's quicker, saves time, haste is the enemy, but where the stone wants to be, where it sits right, for the next 100 years, for the generations to come. She told me of a wall she built 40 years ago between two farms to clarify boundaries. One farmer didn't want to see his cows at the other farmer's place, wanted distance, wanted respect. But also, without knowing it, to create beauty. She didn't know she'd be creating beauty. That wasn't the intention, but it happened. It came about. She'd chosen the stones so carefully, so patiently, that they formed a pattern, not intentionally, not planned in advance, not from a design, but because she placed each stone where it wanted to be, millimeter by millimeter, where God wanted it. And the stones themselves decided what was beautiful, the composition, the harmony. And how the light plays on that wall. The stones are different reds, browns, grays, and yellowish, golden, and a movement emerges, a kind of melody in stone that doesn't end when you look at it. It never ends. You can stand before it for hours, and you always see something new, something different, because the light changes, because time changes, because the eyes change. And that farmer who wanted the boundary, He was hard, she said. A hard, embittered man who only thought about boundaries, only about separation, only about control. He called her when the wall was finished, his voice trembling, and wept. He wept on the phone. He said it wasn't the boundary he'd wanted, that it was wrong. It wasn't just a boundary, he said. It was art. It was beauty. It was love, unexpected love hidden in stones. And he couldn't live with that love that was in stone, that looked at him every day. And she asked, matter-of-factly, without accusation, whether he wanted her to take it down, tear it apart, whether she should take the stones apart again. But he said no, not literally no, but I don't want it taken down. I just don't want to have to pass it every day. I don't want to see it. The wall remained there, steadfast, and he moved away from his farm, away from the beauty, away from himself. And now, 40 years later, the whole village comes, the whole region comes to see the wall at sunset, when the light is gold, and photographs it and says admiringly, "That's beautiful. That's made by God. That's a miracle, not by humans." But it was a woman, a single woman, with hands, with patience, with love, who could speak with stones. She said that the problem of modern times is that we want to do everything fast, that we can't wait, can't listen. Fast, fast, fast. Cement, machines, force instead of patience. Money instead of wisdom. Profit instead of love. But a stone doesn't want to go fast. A stone knows only slow, only time, only patience, only becoming. A stone knows only permanence. It doesn't grow old faster, only older, only more itself, only deeper its nature. And if you lay a stone hastily, if you throw it instead of placing it carefully, then the wall will know that, will feel that, will live with that, and eventually it will start to speak, to crack, to break, from the haste, from the misunderstanding between builder and material, from the violence. A wall is honest. It doesn't lie. It doesn't hide. It shows, reveals how you built it, whether with love or with haste, whether with respect or with brutality. A wall is a mirror of the builder's heart. She gazed out at the flying mountains, dark, distant mountains, and her gaze grew very wide, distant, dreamy, as though she could see all the walls she'd built in her life, countless, lost in the valleys of the Jura, in the forests, in the villages, some already 200 years old, made beautiful by wind and time, their colors changed by weather, their original roughness smoothed, softened, made human by decades of sun, of rain. And she said that the age of the walls means life, that age isn't a sign of decay, but evidence. That means you worked right, that you didn't lie. The stones would betray that, the truth would come out. That you respected the stone, didn't use it, didn't exploit it, but respected it like a person. That you negotiated with it, conducted a dialogue. And the stone will carry you, will hold the wall, long after your death, long after you're forgotten. Your wall will stand, generations will pass by it, and they won't know your name, won't know you existed. But your love will keep them warm on cold days. Your care will hold them, upright, steadfast, true. The train stopped at Delimont, the city of the Jura, and she stood up, slowly, with genuine strength. Not young, but reliable. And I watched her still have that heavy walk, as though gravity were pulling her downward toward stone, because she'd been stone for so long, had become stone from her work, changed, metamorphosed by decades in which she held stone, understood stone, spoke with stones. And she left the train with a small bag, without hurry, without drama, and I imagined her making her way to a wall somewhere that's waiting. There's always a wall that waits, always a task, and starting again to lay, stone by stone, patience by patience, without hurry, without impatience, without force, respectfully, with humility, as though building a church or telling a love story or living a life.
And I sit here, and my body grows heavier, like stone, like sediment, like a wall slowly growing older, older and more beautiful, older and wiser. And the stones around me, even those the train is built from, the steel, that's also stone. A liquid stone, a stone that carries people, carries burdens, carries dreams. They hold me, patiently, without hurry, without impatience. Warm from the heating, but also warm from something older, something deeper, from love that lives in craft, in stones, in patience. And I let myself sink, stone by stone. The bed becomes the wall, and I build my sleep, stone by stone, patiently, rightly, without haste, without hurry. And I fall into the wall, into sleep, deep, warm, secure. I met the old cyclist on the Bruges to Ghent line on an autumn evening when the fields were already dark, had lost their green color, were only black against the sky, and only telegraph poles flew past, black lines against the dark sky, like musical notes, endless, repeating. He was one of those men you can still see strength in, long strength, even though time has done its best, given him white hair like snow, wrinkles around the eyes like maps, like lines of a long journey. His legs were the legs of a cyclist, characteristic, unmistakable. Not thick, not muscular in the modern sense, not like a bodybuilder, but hard, well-trained, sinewy, lean, as though they'd stored 1,000 kilometers in every fiber, the distance imprinted. 1,000 cold mornings, 1,000 hills climbed, conquered, patiently conquered. He told me that he'd spent his whole life on a bike, that the bike was his life. Not metaphorically, but literally. Not professionally, not as a racer, not on the road in the Tour of Belgium. There were no cups, no medals, no fame. He'd been a librarian in Bruges, very quiet work, among books, among silence, among books that don't move, don't travel. But in the morning, before the library opened, an hour before, at 5 o'clock, he rode. And in the evening, when it closed, at 6, at 8, immediately away on the bike, no transition, immediate motion. For 50 years, every day, practically every day, only when it was snow-covered and the bike couldn't grip, only when the body hurt too much, was injured. But that was rare, very rare, almost never. Not from ambition, not to get better, not to break records, but because his body needed it, the way other people need to breathe, the way you must eat, the way you drink water, the way you need to sleep. I asked him if he ever participated in competitions in his youth, if the ambition was stronger back then. He shook his head slowly and smiled quietly, inwardly. He said that racing would kill cycling, that it destroys something that's sacred. You don't ride to beat someone else, not to win, not for a cup sitting in a cabinet, not for fame that fades. You ride to feel the wind on your skin, to know freedom, to cross the mountains, not to conquer them, to dominate them, but to honor them, to respect them, to learn their patience. Not to test your body's limits, not to ride wild, not to prove yourself, but to respect them, to understand where the limits are and accept them with gentleness. Respect, not victory. Patience, not speed. Gentleness rather than strength. That was his way alone, and it was a way that had fulfilled him for 50 years, that kept him alive, that made him happy. He described to me a route he'd ridden again and again for 5 decades. From Bruges over the flat fields where nothing breaks the wind, where you can feel the wind pure, unhindered.
along the canals where the water is black and green and mirrors the sky exactly. Over little wooden bridges he knows all by name. The bridge with green railings, the bridge where the wood splinters and ages, the bridge where a dog always barks. Through villages whose names are as familiar to him as his own hand, as his own heartbeat. Tielt, Ringine, Erp, names like friends. He knows every tree on this route, he said. The old oaks, gnarled, wise, that stand at kilometer 19, have stood for generations. The linden at kilometer 32, symmetrical, beautiful. He knows where the winds blow hardest, between Feldberg and Klembergen, where the air grows cold, blustery, where the best light is in the afternoon, the golden hour. The golden hours at a certain bend, where the sun sits low, where an old woman sits and sometimes offers cider when you pass, even though she's no longer young as she once was, even though her hands tremble, even though time has changed her.
But now, he said, and his voice wasn't sad but factual, but with a kind of depth, the bike won't do it anymore. Not physically. Not because he didn't want to, not because his heart wasn't ready, but because the body says the time comes when you do other things, learn other rhythms. That's not a loss, he said. That's a transformation, a metamorphosis, a new chapter in a long book. Perhaps you sit on a different bike, in thought, and ride the old ways again every day, in memory, perfectly, painlessly. Or perhaps you simply sit and watch how others ride, how the young ride, with innocence. Perhaps that's the true school of age, learning that the body isn't the only thing that can ride, that can move. The mind can ride too, fast, endlessly. The soul can ride. And that journey doesn't stop, not ever, not really. He also showed me a small graph on his phone, an old phone with a large display. He'd recorded every day of the last 10 years carefully, obsessively almost, kilometers, time, average speed, all noted. A visual proof of the life he'd lived, decades compressed into a screen. The mountains hadn't gotten bigger. On the contrary, they grew flatter, the distances shrank, the years took their toll. But that wasn't important, he said, not really. What counted was the continuity, the regularity, that each line was connected to the next, year after year, day after day, like a red thread that was never broken, that couldn't be, that he protected. His son was with him on the train. A large, quiet man of about 50, no longer young himself, with the same long legs as his father, inherited, the same upright posture, the spine straight, learned from decades on the bike. He looked at his father while he spoke, very attentively, with a kind of love that wasn't sentimental, not dramatic, but light, uncomplicated, familiar, natural as breath. And I saw that the son also knew that his father wouldn't be able to ride much longer, that the time comes, inevitable, that the body grows weaker. The knees weren't good anymore. The father didn't say it, but you could see it. You could feel it. The pain was invisible, but present. And that was okay. Everything was okay. That was accepted. That was part of the rhythm, this great music that life plays, this ta-dum, ta-dum, that slows with the years but doesn't end, that just changes its speed. I asked the old cyclist, "What will you miss most?" And the question hung in the air between us, an important question. He thought for a long time, a very long time, many minutes, and I saw that he was thinking honestly, not simply answering, but looking deep into himself. He said, "The rhythm. The pedal stroke is the only thing that ever seemed perfect to me in my whole life for 60 years. Ta-dum, ta-dum, ta-dum. It's not fast, not slow, not hard, not soft, not aggressive. It's just right. It's like a metronome that beats my life, that measures my time. And when that's over, when the pedals are still, when the legs can't anymore, I must find a new rhythm, a new beat. Perhaps breath, regular even, calm. Perhaps the heartbeat, ta-dum, ta-dum. The same as always, reliable, faithful. Perhaps only being able to sit still and remember, ride the route in thought again and again, every turn, every tree, perfectly, without pain, without tiredness, immortally.
At Ghent, they got out, father and son, hand in hand, not simply for support, but with intention, with tenderness, consciously, like two people who understood each other without ever needing to say much, who didn't need to speak to love each other. The love was self-evident. And I watched them walk on the platform, slowly, not in a hurry, step by step, safely. And the father didn't look back at the train, not nostalgically, not sadly, not wistfully, but as though he'd simply understood that one journey was over, that this ride, this story, now ended, that a new one, different, with new pedals, a new rhythm, a new life, was beginning.
And the train carries on. Ta-dum, ta-dum.
Like a wheel turning and turning, endless, not tiring. And I sit here in my seat, and the rhythm grows slower, the wheels slower, and the eyes grow heavier. The thoughts fade. And somewhere, old cyclists still ride their ways, not with legs, not with strength, but with the heart, with memory, perfectly, painlessly. And that's good. That's enough. The memory comes when I hear the water, and tonight I hear it from somewhere, from outside, from rain on the roof or from within, from my memories, my bones. I can't say. The distinction is difficult for me. And it brings me back to a night long ago, decades ago, on the Wismar to Bad Doberan line, a route by the Baltic Sea, when I was young and didn't yet know that some moments stay with you forever, that they don't fade, that they visit you decades later in trains, simply because they were so still, so complete, so true, that they became immortal. It was a night like many other nights, but it was also the only night that counted, that really mattered for my whole life. I've got out at Wismar for reasons I've long since forgotten. Perhaps I was in love, with a face I no longer see. Perhaps I was sad in a way I couldn't explain. Perhaps I simply needed a night without platforms, without windows, without wheels, without motion. And I went to the harbor because I couldn't sleep, because the night was too alive and the city was foreign to me, a strange Hanseatic city, brick and water. And I needed something familiar, the water, the sea that's the same everywhere. It was June, still warm, early summer, and the moon stood so bright that the Baltic looked silver, not blue as in daylight, not gray as in the morning, but silver, metallic, as though light itself had become liquid, as though the sky had poured itself into the water, and the water's surface trembled like silk, like living skin, as though the earth were breathing. And there lay an old boat, small, not bigger than 2 meters, painted green, but worn by time so patiently, so gently washed by sun and rain and decades, that you could see the layers of years, green, red, white, green again, green a third time, like the rings in a tree trunk, and each color was an epic, a generation of fishermen, a life, an attempt to tame the Baltic.
A man sat in it, in the boat, very still, very old, about 70, 80, it was hard to say. The age was in his hands, not in his face. With hands as discolored as the boat's wood, from salt and sun and work, from decades, from 1,000 fish, from 1,000 nets. He had a pipe, but not in his mouth. It lay beside him on a kind of wooden board, not smoking just now, but simply present,
as though a pipe itself is already a form of speech, a kind of silent statement, a symbol of age, of waiting. I stood on the quay, the Baltic below, dark, deep, and I didn't speak to him. That would have disturbed everything, ruined it all. Instead, I sat down very slowly on a wet stone, cold, cool, wet from spray, and we sat together, this old man in his boat, which was old too, me on my stone on the quay, and watched how the moon drew its traces across the water, long, silver paths of light that led nowhere, but everywhere, to every harbor, to every heart that lay awake, that listened.
After a long time, he said,
"The boat goes for repair tomorrow, perhaps for the last time." He didn't say it sadly, not bitterly, not wearily, only matter-of-factly, calmly, as though saying that it will rain tomorrow, or that the tide comes, or that the sun sinks. Simply a fact, a truth that's accepted, that you can't change. I asked him how long he'd had the boat, how many years, how many decades. He said it's not important to know the number, the exact number. What matters is that someone still cares for it, that it doesn't simply rot in a corner, that it isn't forgotten, that someone still thinks of the boat. The world throws away, he said, the great modern world, where everything is plastic, everything is fast, everything is for one season, 1 year, then rubbish. But I try to tend, to preserve, to rescue. That's my small resistance against forgetting, against great indifference. That's my job in my old age, not to make anymore, not to create, but to hold fast, to keep safe. And he didn't even touch the pipe, didn't lift it from the board, but I felt that he wanted to speak, that something in him had been waiting for many years for someone to listen, to sit quiet, to understand that words by water are different. So I listen. He told me of fishing trips with his son 40 years ago, a whole lifetime. Nights when the nets were full, so full that the boat nearly sank and the fish shone silver in the moonlight, warm, still alive, thrashing. Of nights when the stars were so numerous that you could never again be afraid of the dark, because the dark was here, everywhere, all-encompassing, and it wasn't dark, but full of light, of millions of lights, of hope. Of storms when the boat danced like a living body, wild movements, chaotic, every time he thought, now it goes under, now it all ends. But it always came back, rose again, wave after wave, strong, reliable. Of the only woman who ever sat on this boat with him, not his wife, he said, just a woman, whom he didn't want to speak of anymore, couldn't, too long ago. But how the night had smelled, of salt and tar and a perfume that time long ago dissolved, but that he still smells in dreams. And then he told me, or told the night, the Baltic, the moon. It wasn't clear to me to whom exactly, but it didn't matter. Of nights when this boat turned like a feather in a tanner's hand, turned, rose, sank, and he held the lines, the ropes, tight. These ropes that were power, that meant everything, and trusted his strength, his experience, and the grace of the sea, the favor of nature. Of fish so heavy that they stretched entire nets, so that the boat nearly went under, sank, disappeared, but never went under, never completely, never forever, God protect it. Of storms that passed like animals, wild animals, black animals, and then suddenly there was silence again, peace again, moonlight again. And of the moment, sometime, after years and years, when he understood that he wasn't dependent on this boat, that his life didn't hang on it, but that the boat was dependent on him, that the boat needed him, that his hands needed it, his knowledge, his love. I asked him, "And now? Now, as you grow older, as the body can no longer?" And he smiled, for the first time that whole night, a soft smile, not bitter, not desperate, but soft as water,
that changed his whole face, made it younger somehow. He said, "Now I sit here and remember. That's also life, real life, you see. Some days are for doing, for fishing, for working, for going on, for creating. Some days are for remembering, and those are just as important, perhaps more so. Memory is sometimes even more precious than the doing itself, because it's not eternal. It disappears too sometime when you die, when the memory has no one left to carry it. And that makes it valuable, makes it precious. That's why I sit here on the quay in the moonlight and let the night paint them, my memories, into the water, into the moonlight. Share them with you, share them with the Baltic, so they're not completely lost." The moon began to sink, slowly, as though time itself grows tired, as though the night begins to sleep. And I saw that this old man began to sleep very gently, his head nodded backwards against the boat, against the wooden wall, his hands in his lap, still beside the pipe that still hadn't been smoked, that waited. I left him there, not because I was cruel, not because I didn't want to stay. I could have stayed, would have been welcome, he wouldn't have noticed. But because I understood that I'd become part of his memory, a new visitor sitting on the quay, and his boat now needed only him and the moon, needed the silence. The harbor would hold him, safe, lovingly. The Baltic, that's cold but not unkind, and the old green boat that would go for repair tomorrow. But he didn't care about that, about this repair, this necessary maintenance. It was already immortal, in spirit, in his memory, in the scent of salt that came from the pipe, that still waited, patiently. And I'm back on the train tonight. And I still hear the water. I hear it in the wheels. Or no, it's the rattle of the wheels. But that's also water, also a river, also something that flows and carries me, moves me, slowly, safely, like a boat drifting on the Baltic, drifting out into the unknown. Ta-dum, ta-dum. And I sit very still, as in an old boat, and time no longer matters. Time's not important here, has become unimportant. Everything is memory, and at the same time, everything is present, alive. That stone on the quay is here, in my seat. That old man sits beside me, waiting, waiting. And I breathe, slowly, regularly, like the waves. And the moonlight comes through the window, silver, warm, golden now. And the pipe still smells, still, of salt. And I glide away into a harbor without land, into a boat that arrives nowhere, only travels. The rattle of the wheels has a special rhythm tonight. Ta-dum, ta-dum. A rhythm that's like music, like an amplified heartbeat. And it reminds me of an evening many years ago on the Nuremberg to Ansbach line. A line I don't normally travel, but that evening I did. I met a woman who told me, not asking, but informing me, that she was once a tightrope walker. Not tried or wanted, no, she was it, actually, truly, with her whole body. For 40 years, night after night, under lights, before thousands, on a single rope, over the void. She was traveling in spring when the train went slower than usual, carefully, over bridges, over water, and she sat very still in her seat, her hands quiet in her lap, not nervous, not restless, not trembling, but her eyes followed the flicker of telegraph poles outside, flying past like the tick of a metronome, like a beat, a pulse, as though the eyes had their own memory, a memory of ropes, music that only she could hear, only her, and no one else in the world. She told me what it was like to enter the rope each night, under circus tents in strange cities, the rope taut, waiting. The great lights on her face, so hot that she could sweat, that the sweat came into her eyes, that she was almost blinded by light and heat and fear just from standing under it. The tent full of people, hundreds, thousands, a crowd of humans, all holding their breath at the same time, like one great animal, one heart that stood still. Not because of the risk. Many didn't understand that. The audience thought it was about fear, about danger, about the possibility that she would fall. But it was different, entirely different. It was because something impossible was happening before their eyes, something that shouldn't be, that a woman could enter the air, that the laws of nature would go silent for a moment. She walked over nothing, over 20 meters of air, warm air, dry, in a silk costume, silvery, glittering, with bare feet on the rope, and nothing held her, absolutely nothing, no net so large it could catch her, except what she herself was, her body, its knowledge. Balance, courage, a trust in one's own body that can't be explained, that must be experienced, not understood. And a kind of inner singing. Yes, that was it exactly, she said. Her voice grew quiet. A music that exists only on the rope, a music that comes from within, from the soul. She showed me her hands, slowly, almost hesitantly, as if they surprised even her. That these hands were there, that they were still hands. They were beautiful, although, or perhaps because, they showed that they'd lived, hard, worn. Calluses on the fingers, thickened, brown, dark brown, from the rope, from gripping, from holding, from decades of digging, of clinging. An old scar on the palm, a fall, she said, 1987, in Munich, a December evening, cold, when the rope was somehow too thin, too old, or her heart too heavy, weighed down, sad. But she fell only about 2 meters onto the safety nets, as it should be, as planned precisely, tested 100 times over. The scar reminded her every day, she said, of the moment of humility, that the net was there, that someone had stretched it before she went up, the maestro, the safety master, the older man, the circus man, the man who believed in her trust, who trusted her courage. That trust is the basic form of all daring, that you can't fly without a net, without someone who ensures your safety. Without the net, maybe she wouldn't have dared to climb up, or she would have climbed and played with fear, would have performed fear on the rope, and that would have been all, a show without soul. She was now in her 7th decade, the skin at her neck loose, her hands trembling when she sat very still, when attention waned. But when she talked, when she spoke of that time, I still saw the young woman in her, not in her body, not in her movements, but in the way her voice flew, the way she glowed when she spoke of the music that came from below to above, the music of the circus, the drums that gave her the beat, the pulse, the timing, the life. The orchestra played for the circus audience, for the spectators, hundreds, but the music was for the rope, for the body on the line, for her alone, a duet between music and body. The maestro stood beneath the rope and never looked up, not once, never raised his eyes, because he knew she made it, that she was on the rope, safe. His trust was unshakable, a kind of belief, religious, calm. Only once a year eye contact, at the end of the season, when they left the stage, when the last net was packed away, when the tent was dismantled. And then, only then, after months of silence, they looked at each other, and the eyes said what a whole year of music couldn't say, what no rope could say. She said she was never badly injured, never seriously, not so that she lay in hospital. Except that one night in 1987, and even that wasn't serious. The body learns what you ask of it, and it's a kind of miracle, she said. A miracle you don't understand, only experience. The rope speaks to you when you learn to listen, not with words, not with voices, but with the feeling under your feet, the way the line vibrates, how it lives, how it gives you instructions.
It tells you when you can go faster, when the tension is right, steady, holding, when you can glide, when you must slow down, when a wind comes, when the air changes, when your body grows tired and you feel it before your mind knows it. It's like dancing with something alive, not with a dead partner, not with choreography, but with a rope that breathes, that listens to you, that adapts to you. And at some point, after 40 years, countless times, thousands of nights, the rope becomes part of you, not metaphorically, but literally, physically. You carry it in your nerves, in your bones, in your marrow, in your depths, even when you no longer climb it, even when your feet touch the ground, even when the rope is long since rolled up and rotten, you still carry it.
And why do I stop? I asked her. That was the question I most wanted to know, that interested me most.
She stared out the window for a long time, a very long time, and her eyes became very bright, not sad, not wistful, not nostalgic, but glowing, as though in that very moment she saw that tightrope walker she'd been from the outside with the audience's eyes, as if seeing her own life like a film, as if watching another person. She said, and her voice was calm, almost matter-of-fact, but with depth, "Because it's time for others. Because the young woman who comes after me, the woman with fast legs and brave eyes, also must learn to walk over the void, over her fear, over the rope that tells her where it won't hold. Must replace me, not copy, never copy, that's the greatest mistake. A tightrope walker doesn't copy, she reinvents herself, reinvents the rope, reinvents the music. Replace, that's it. That's the gift of one generation to the next. Space, room, opportunity, the chance to find your own rope."
The train arrived at Ansbach, the platform visible now, the lights close, the waiting house, the first announcement of the end of this journey.
She stood up, without hurry, slowly, very gently. Her movements were still controlled, still elegant, still balanced, as though the tightrope walker was still balancing herself on the train of life, still walking a rope, safe. She said only one more thing to me, only one, and I hear these sentences still today when I lie awake in the evening, when the night is dark. The best thing about getting old is that you know what you were afraid of, and you see that fear was never the thing, never the reality. Fear was only the sensory organ of life, the warning, the signal. The thing was always the rope, that one point, that one line that holds you, carries you, defines you. The rope and the air below it, endless, boundless. And the trust that the net is there, that someone stretched it, that you're not alone. That stays. That stays your whole life. That you never drop. Your whole life. She went out onto the dark platform. Cold air from outside streamed in, and I watched her walk very upright, very balanced, as though the rope had corrected her spine forever, had taught her the back, taught her the posture, what it means to stand upright against gravity, against time. And I lean back in my seat. The headrest is warm from the body, and the rattle comes back. Ta-dum. Ta-dum. The train starts moving again, and I imagine that all people carry a kind of rope, invisible, hidden, something from their past, something great that held them balanced when it mattered, when everything hung on the rope. A trust, a love, a task, a mission that saved us, that held us. And now on the train, in the night, in the dark night, I'm also very balanced, slowly, quietly, safely, as though I'm walking on my own rope, invisible, and the net beneath me is gentle and wide, and someone has stretched it. I'm at the Innkeeper on the Munich-Freising line in autumn, when the leaves had already turned brown and gray like old photographs, rain rattling against the windows like drums, rhythmic, soothing, music that draws you to sleep. She sat across from me in the compartment, and it was as though she'd sat down to tell me something that had weighed on her heart for a long time,
something that took years to find words for. She was small, solid, powerful, with hands that constantly wanted to do something that couldn't sit still, adjusting a cup that was already in its place, folding a cloth that was already neat, plucking at a thread only she could see, the restlessness of work. Her hair had turned gray, a silver gray you can only imagine if you've spent a long time in kitchen steam, in the warmth of ovens, near boiling pots, as though the heat had silvered her. But her eyes had remained young, awake and curious as a child's, as though observing the whole world, searching for details others would overlook. A posture, the way someone holds their spoon, whether with trembling or strength. A small furrow between the eyes that reveals sorrow or worry, or both together. She told me of her inn, an old house from the 18th century on a quiet street, not on a main road, but off to one side, where guests came to forget, not their names, not their worries entirely, never entirely, but at least for a few hours, the volume of the world, the noise, the hurry that rings outside. Not to celebrate, not to run wild, that happened elsewhere in the loud beer gardens where the music's too loud and the voices shout. Here they came to eat, to speak quietly if they wanted to speak at all, to switch off the world for a few hours, or at least the hurry, the impatience, the time that can't stand still. She cooks herself, she said, not because a chef is expensive, but on principle, with ingredients from the market that she chooses personally, that she's touched, held in her hand. And she can't do otherwise, can't simply open tins or reheat frozen food. A chicken that she knows, that she's visited before it came to her table, an animal that ran in the yard of a farmer who calls the animal by its name. That's Kunigunda, or that's Old Sepp. And the innkeeper knew these names, knew which chicken was which. Cheese from the woman 2 valleys over, a woman about her age who makes milk into cheese, from cows whose names the innkeeper also knew, whom she sometimes greeted when passing by. Mushrooms she gathers herself when autumn comes with a special knife her father gave her, a knife as old as her memory, its handle smooth from use, from trust. I asked her where she found the strength to do all this, day after day, year after year, without a holiday, without a break, always setting the same tables with white cloths, always cooking the same dishes from recipes her grandmother gave her, knowing the guests wouldn't remember, would leave and forget her. She thought for a long time before answering, a very long time. And I saw that she was thinking honestly, not simply reciting a prepared answer, but digging deeper. She said she'd never asked about strength, never posed the question to herself. Strength doesn't come from wanting, she said, not from discipline, not from guilt. Strength comes when you love something, when doing it is love. When you see a guest arriving, tense, wound up, restless, with shoulders drawn up to his ears, fists in his pockets, and then, after 2 hours at the table, in the warmth, with the food, you see him breathe, truly breathe, really breathe, from deep down, from where life lives. You see his shoulders sink slowly, as though you'd lifted a great weight from him, as though you'd made him lighter. You see him drink his glass of wine more slowly, because he no longer has reason to hurry, because time here makes no enemies, because time is gentle here. That's enough. That's the strength. That's more than strength. That's a reason to live. She told me of a man who came every week, always alone, always on Wednesday, like a ritual that kept him alive, that structured his week, that kept him awake. For 10 years. 10 years, she said, every week, same day, same time, same table, near the window. That was, she said, longer than some people are married to their wives. 650 times that this man came. He never said much, wasn't talkative, ate the same dish, pork roast with dumplings, and he always ate it completely, down to the last bite, to a clean plate, as though he were eating for the first time each time, with enjoyment, with reverence.
But one day he didn't come, and the table remained empty, and the innkeeper knew something was wrong, not from a phone call, not from a message, but from the feeling that came over the inn when a regular chair sits empty, when a hole opens in the usual order. She asked around, questioned other guests, old men who'd been coming longer, until she found out that his son had fallen ill, very seriously, very threateningly, and the man was with him at the hospital, keeping watch, waiting. She sent him homemade broth, a large pot full of chicken and vegetables and thyme, through a neighbor, a friend of the man. He came back later, weeks later, after many Wednesdays without him, and his eyes were red, swollen from tears and sleeplessness. And the only thing he said, sitting at the same table in the same voice, was, "The broth gave me strength." Not the food, the broth, he said, the way it was made, with love, with care, with the knowledge that someone was thinking of me. Since then, he came on Fridays, too, additionally, to say thank you, to show that he'd understood, that the innkeeper was a healer, not with medicine, but with broth and attention. "That's the job," she explained to me as the train drove through the night and the windows were black like mirrors, impenetrable, reflective. Not the cooking, not being the perfect cook. Others are just as good at that, or better, young people with cooking schools and modern knowledge. The remembering, the small attention that no one sees but everyone feels, deep in the bones. That this guest drinks his coffee without sugar, always, without exception, because his wife is too sweet and the coffee must be bitter, for balance, for equilibrium in the marriage. That other one takes it with a dash of rum, not because it tastes good, but because he carries cold within himself, grief, loss, and the rum warms him, soothes, comforts him. That the old lady always asks for a window seat, not by chance, but because she sees the birds outside, and the birds remind her of her late husband, who was a bird watcher, who taught her the names of all the birds. That the businessman, who looks like stress in person, tense, hurried, in truth only needs someone to ask him how he really is, not politely, but genuinely, not a formula, but genuine curiosity. And then, when he answers, quietly or loudly, to listen, truly listen. Not just wait impatiently until you can speak again, but be present, here, with him. The train raced through the dusk, faster now. The wheels clacked louder, and the innkeeper gazed out at the flying lights, houses, windows, other people in their warm rooms, other realities, other lives. I saw how her hands suddenly stilled, as though she'd noticed they weren't working, that she was sitting relaxed at the table, that there was, for a moment, no inn, no stove, no guest waiting. That was rare for this woman, this rest, this silence. Perhaps she was thinking of a table waiting for her, set but unoccupied, empty like a promise. Of a stove that must be heated, that must stay warm because the night grows cold, the windows fog, the guests arrive cold. Of a meal that wants cooking, already fragrant, steaming, not because she herself is hungry. Innkeepers eat little, in passing, not properly, but because someone will come and silently need her to cook for them, to show, through the food, through the taste, through the steam, that she sees them, that they matter, that they're not nobody. She left the train at Freising with a small bag, not heavy, not full, because she took little, needed little from outside. The innkeeper needed nothing from outside. Her whole life was in her inn, in her tables, her plates. And I watched her walk down the platform with the calm of someone who knows what the work is for, what it means. Not for fame. No one would read her name in a newspaper. No critic would admire her. No paper would report on her. Not for money. Inns aren't profitable, not in the modern sense, not wealth-making. But because there are still tables waiting, countless tables, tables that are empty now because the guests haven't arrived yet, haven't knocked. But soon they will. Soon someone will sit there. And guests, people who haven't yet found enough silence in this loud world, in this hurried world, come to her, perhaps without knowing it, to find exactly that. Silence, attention,
being seen, and a dish made for them, not for anyone, not generically, but specially, personally, for them alone, for their hunger, their pain, their loneliness.
And the train carries on. Ta-dum, ta-dum. And I think of inns, of small lights in distant houses where someone cooks while rain falls outside, merciless, cold. Ta-dum, ta-dum. And somewhere a guest sits, alone, lonely, beaten down by the world, and breathes slowly, slowly, for the first time today, and becomes human again, valuable again, seen again. And that's enough. That's everything.